The moment I dropped my phone, it felt like everything in my world paused. It hit the floor with a sickening thud. My fingers trembling, I picked it up. The screen was still glowing, showing a picture that knocked the air out of me. It was my daughter, Hope, in a wedding gown, beaming with joy beside a man I hardly recognized. There was no mistaking it, she had married him, Devon Hayes, without a word to me. "Hope, did you get married?" I asked, my voice small, almost cracking. On the other end of the line, the hum of traffic and distant voices filled the air, but there was no excitement. No joy, just the sounds of a normal day, a normal life, without me in it. "Yeah, Mama, yesterday," Hope replied. I couldn't breathe. "Why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't I there?" "It was a small thing, Mama, just family, family." That word rang in my ears, over and over, like a hammer striking an anvil. Family. My mind raced as I stared at her frozen smile on the screen. She looked so happy, and yet I wasn't there. It dawned on me in that moment I wasn't even an afterthought. I was the absence, the forgotten part of her life. I deleted the picture, the weight of that decision heavier than anything I'd ever felt. In the silence that followed, a question gnawed at me. What does a mother do when she stops being family? My name is Clara May Harrison, and for 67 years I believed family was everything. I worked hard, and I sacrificed everything to give my daughter Hope the best life I could. After my husband Elijah died, it was just me and Hope. I worked 2 jobs cleaning houses for the Rodwells and the Millers. Every dollar I earned went toward Hope's education, her future, her dreams. I thought of her wedding day constantly, imagining myself standing beside her, helping her plan the perfect day, the dream she deserved. But last Tuesday, that dream came crashing down. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping my morning coffee, scrolling through my phone when I saw the picture. Hope, radiant in her wedding gown, with Devon by her side. The only guests, his parents, Franklin and Eleanor Hayes. My heart sank as I scrolled through the comments. There was no mention of me, no mention of my years of sacrifices, my love, my devotion. I wasn't even a part of the picture. I called her 3 times that day. Each call went straight to voicemail. I sent messages pretending everything was fine, pretending I hadn't seen the wedding post. I only got a response hours later. "I'm fine, Mama, we'll talk later, we'll talk later." I wanted to scream. How could she think that was okay? I spent the next few days drowning in memories. When Hope was little, I worked day and night. I sewed clothes for the Millers, cleaned the Rodwells' house. I barely slept, but when she was sick, I was there. I was always there. I remember when she was 5 and came down with pneumonia. I spent 15 days taking care of her, barely resting, driving her to doctors, paying for her medicine with money I didn't have. She recovered, and one day she hugged me and said, "Mama, when I get married, you're going to be the prettiest maid of honor ever." I held on to that promise. Stored it in my heart for over 20 years. I also remembered her sweet 16. I'd been saving for 2 years to give her the party of her dreams. I worked extra shifts, gave up luxuries, just to make sure she had the celebration she deserved. She told me I was the best mother in the world. Her guest said you could feel the love in every detail of the event. I poured my heart into everything I did for her. Every meal, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. As the years passed, things began to change. Hope went off to college, and I worked harder than ever. My knees ached, my hands cracked, but I kept going. I wanted her to have a future that was better than mine, one where she didn't have to worry about money. I thought that if I kept working hard enough, kept sacrificing enough, everything would be okay, but Hope began to change too. Her visits home became fewer and fewer. She started spending more time with friends, with new people. Every time I asked her about her day, the answers became shorter, more distant. "I'm fine, Mama. I'll tell you later." but later never came. It was during her last year of college that I first heard about Devon. She spoke about him constantly, how smart he was, how he came from a good family, how his future was bright. I was happy for her, but deep down, I felt something else. It was a pang of loss. Devon represented a world I didn't belong to. A world where I was just the woman who cleaned other people's houses. The first time he came to our home for dinner, I cooked my best meal: fried chicken, mac and cheese, cornbread, and sweet tea. I wanted to make a good impression. But when he looked around our house, I could tell something was off. Hope explained everything, as if she needed to justify our way of life. "Your house is very nice, Mrs. Harrison," he said as he left, but the tone in his voice made it clear he didn't mean it. After that night, things changed. Hope became distant. Devon's visits became less frequent. Their relationship grew, but I began to feel like I was no longer a part of her life. She had other priorities now. I was no longer the center of her world. As time went on, I watched Hope's life slowly drift away from mine. She started talking about her future more and more, and her voice would light up when she mentioned her new job prospects or the trip she was planning with Devon. At first, I was thrilled to hear about her achievements, proud even. But as the months went by, it became clear that those conversations were all about the world that didn't have room for me. I was no longer part of her new life, and that hurt more than I had ever expected. I remember one Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch with a cup of sweet tea, asking Hope about the plans she had made for the future. The conversation was short, polite, but distant. "We're thinking about getting our own place," she said, almost as an afterthought. "That's great, baby," I replied, forcing a smile, even though it felt like she was telling me less and less. "You two need your space." The words came out of my mouth without even thinking, but inside I was crushed. I knew, deep down, that it was more than just space. It was a space I wasn't invited into. I had never thought I would feel this way about my own daughter. It wasn't like she was a stranger to me. Hope was my world. But in the quiet of those moments, I realized how much I had given and how little I received in return. The sacrifices I made, the late nights sewing dresses to put food on the table, the weekends I spent cleaning houses for families that didn't even seem to notice me. The years I spent with my mind constantly focused on giving Hope the best of everything, all of it had slowly built up to something I never could have imagined. She had slowly, imperceptibly, started to push me out. I had become invisible to her, like a background character in the story of her life. One afternoon, when Hope came home for a visit, I asked her about Devon. "When do I get to meet him?" I asked, trying to make light of it, trying to keep the conversation casual. But inside, my heart was heavy. She gave me a look, one that said more than words could convey, before replying, "You've met him before, Mama, that was it." She never told me how serious they were, or when things had changed. It wasn't until her final year of college that I began to sense something more. Something that was slowly unraveling the fabric of the life I thought I had with her. She was no longer the girl who would call me to ask about how to deal with a problem or to confide in me about her hopes and fears. Now, when I tried to connect, the conversation always seemed forced. She wasn't the same, and neither was I. Her world was expanding, but I was being left behind. When Hope graduated from college, I thought things would go back to normal. I thought maybe this was the beginning of something new, that she would need me more now that she was stepping into the adult world, starting her career. But things didn't go the way I had imagined. After graduation, we celebrated together at a restaurant in Decatur. Devon's parents were there too, the Hayes, who had become such an important part of Hope's life. I did my best to blend in, to make them feel comfortable, even though I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong. Franklin and Eleanor Hayes were well-spoken and polished. They talked about trips to Europe, art exhibitions, and upscale restaurants. I felt like I was sitting in a foreign country, surrounded by a language I didn't understand. When I mentioned that I worked as a housekeeper, there was a brief, awkward silence before Hope quickly changed the subject. I could feel the tension in the room, but I chose to let it go. At least, that's what I told myself. That night, after we returned home, Hope said something that stayed with me for weeks. "Mama, I know you just want to be friendly, but sometimes you say things that can be misinterpreted. You need to tone it down around Devon's family. They're more refined. The word echoed in my head like an accusation, a judgment. I wasn't refined. I was just Clara May Harrison, a woman who had worked hard her whole life, a woman who had sacrificed her own needs for the people she loved. But that wasn't good enough for Hope anymore. The distance between us grew, day by day. I could see it in the way she would brush me off when I asked about her future, in the way she would cancel plans to spend time with Devon or his family. When I asked about her upcoming wedding, she gave me vague answers, as if it didn't matter. She kept saying, "We're not sure yet, Mama, we're just figuring things out." But I knew something wasn't right. And then, one day, I found out the truth. Hope had gotten married without me. She had gotten married and left me out of it completely. I'll never forget that morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, when I logged into Facebook and saw the picture. There she was, the daughter I had raised. The little girl who once promised to make me the maid of honor at her wedding, now smiling beside her husband, Devon, in a picture that captured the essence of a day I wasn't even invited to. The caption read, "Our special day. Family complete, but not me." I wasn't in that family anymore. And that realization, that crushing weight of rejection, hit me harder than anything I had ever felt. I spent the entire day staring at that picture, trying to understand how everything had slipped away so quietly, so imperceptibly. I called her 3 times that day. All 3 calls went straight to voicemail. I sent her messages, pretending I hadn't seen the wedding pictures, pretending I hadn't noticed the absence. She responded late in the afternoon, "I'm fine, Mama, we'll talk later. That was the line she gave me. As if this wasn't important. As if everything that had come before, the years of my sacrifice, my love, didn't matter anymore. The days that followed were filled with a silence I couldn't escape. I wanted answers, but Hope wasn't willing to give them. Every time I tried to reach out, the messages were the same, "I'm fine, Mama, we'll talk soon," but soon never came. I had spent years sacrificing for her, giving everything I had to make her life better. But none of it seemed to matter now, that night. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something had shifted within me. For so long, I had put all my energy into being a mother, into being there for Hope in every way I could. But now, it felt like she no longer needed me, and maybe she never had. I had been living in the shadow of her life, waiting for her to include me, waiting for her to ask for my help, to need me. But the truth was, she didn't need me anymore. And that realization was more painful than anything I had ever faced. I cried that night, not for the daughter I had lost, but for the woman I had become. I had spent so much of my life giving to others, sacrificing my own dreams, my own happiness. But now it was time for me to stop waiting, to stop being the woman who lived on the sidelines of her own life. I spent the following weeks feeling like I was sinking into a hole, each day becoming harder than the last. It was as if I had lost the part of myself that had given me purpose. My whole life had been about Hope. From the moment she was born, everything I did was for her. Her education, her dreams, her future, they were my everything. I had believed that if I worked hard enough, if I gave everything I had, she would recognize it. But she didn't, and with each passing day, I realized I had given up more of myself than I had ever realized. For years, I had sacrificed so much. I had put aside my own desires, my own goals, all for her. I had lived my life for her, but it was becoming clear that she was no longer living for me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had been living in a fantasy. I had convinced myself that Hope and I would always be close, that we would always share everything. But she had changed. And maybe, just maybe, I had to. I had become a mother who waited for crumbs of affection, for bits of time, for moments that weren't even mine. But deep inside, something began to stir. A new part of me was waking up, a part that had been dormant for decades. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, but I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waiting for Hope to include me in her life when she clearly no longer wanted me there. For the first time, I thought about myself, and that thought terrified me. What would happen if I stopped waiting? What if I started living for me, not for anyone else? I had never considered it before. It was always about Hope, about making sure she had everything she needed, everything she wanted. But now I had to ask myself, what about me? What did I want? What did I need? That night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, the weight of all these thoughts pressing on me, I made a decision. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, nor was it one I had ever expected to make. But it was the right one. It was time for me to stop waiting for Hope to come back into my life. It was time for me to walk away. I had spent so many years thinking that I had to be there for her, that I had to be everything for her. But I had never asked for anything in return. Not once had I asked her to consider me, to make space for me in her world. Now I had to make space for myself. I had to put myself first for once in my life. The first thing I did was call Auntie Rosa. I knew she would understand. Rosa had always been the no-nonsense one, the one who never sugarcoated anything. I needed her honesty, her perspective, because I was too clouded by emotion to think clearly. When I explained what had happened, Rosa listened quietly. There was no judgment in her voice, just understanding. After I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke. Clara May. "I always told you that you gave too much to that girl," she said, her voice firm. "You spoiled her. And now you're seeing the consequences. You've spent your whole life trying to make Hope happy. But what about you? What have you done for yourself?" Her words stung, but they were true. I had spent my entire life giving, sacrificing, without ever considering my own needs. I had been so focused on Hope's happiness that I had forgotten to think about my own. And now I was paying the price for it, so what am I supposed to do now? I asked, my voice shaky. "You're going to live for yourself," Rosa said firmly. "You've been living for Hope for too long. Now it's time to live for you. Start making decisions that are good for you, not for anyone else." I sat there in silence for a long time after we hung up. For the first time in years, I wasn't consumed with thoughts of Hope. I wasn't obsessing over why she had excluded me from her wedding or why she had pushed me out of her life. For the first time, I was thinking about myself. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I was going to make a change. I wasn't sure where it would take me, but I knew I had to start by taking control of my own life. I wasn't going to wait for Hope to come around. I wasn't going to keep living in the shadows of her life. I was going to step out and create my own life, one that didn't revolve around her. The first step I took was one that seemed simple, but was more profound than I had anticipated. I started going through my finances. For years, I had kept a tight grip on my money, always saving, always preparing for emergencies, always thinking of Hope. I had a small savings account I had built up over the years, but it was never really for me. It was always for her future, her security. But now that money was mine. It had been mine all along. I went to the bank, walked into Mr. Lawson's office, and sat down with him. He was surprised to see me. I had been a loyal customer for years, but I had always kept my finances simple. I had never really taken the time to learn about investments or financial planning, but now I was determined to change that. I'm ready to take control of my finances. I said, I need to make some changes, and I want to know what options I have. Mr. Lawson looked at me with new respect. You've built up quite a bit over the years, Mrs. Harrison. I'm impressed. It felt good to hear that. For the first time in years, I was being recognized for something I had done on my own. I wasn't just Hope's mother anymore. I was Clara May Harrison. A woman who had worked hard and had built something for herself. It was a small victory, but it meant everything to me. We discussed various options for investing my savings, creating a financial plan that would give me the independence I had always wanted. For the first time in my life, I was thinking about my own future. I wasn't planning for anyone else. I was planning for me. The next step was finding a new place to live. My house had been filled with memories of hope, memories that now felt painful. Every corner reminded me of the life I had built for her, and I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed to create a space for myself, one that was free from the past, from the pain of exclusion. I remembered a conversation I had had with Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, my longtime neighbor. She had mentioned a residential community for older adults in Decatur called the Legacy at Peach Tree. At the time, I had dismissed it, thinking it wasn't for me, but now it seemed like the perfect place to start over. I called the community and scheduled a tour. When I arrived, I was immediately struck by the beauty of the place. The gardens were well kept, the apartments cozy, and the atmosphere peaceful. I could already imagine myself living there, finding a new rhythm in life that didn't revolve around anyone else. It was time for me to build my own happiness, to create a life that was mine and mine alone. It was a strange feeling. Walking through the doors of my new apartment. It was small, but it was mine. No longer did I need to worry about what Hope thought or how I could make her life better. This was my space, my life, my new beginning. The first few days were filled with organizing and settling in. But there was something else that started to happen. I began to feel a sense of freedom, a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in ages, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make my life meaningful. I was doing it myself. I started participating in activities at the Legacy. There were yoga classes, knitting groups, and even ballroom dancing. I found myself enjoying things I had never had time for before, things that made me feel alive. I realized that my life didn't have to be defined by my relationship with Hope. I could build a life for myself, a life full of people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. As the days passed, I felt my confidence growing. I wasn't the woman who had been waiting by the phone for a call from Hope. I wasn't the woman who had spent years sacrificing herself for someone who no longer cared. I was Clara May Harrison, a woman who had found her own way, and that was enough. I had been in my new apartment for a few weeks when I started to realize how much my life was changing. Every morning, I woke up to the sun shining through the windows, casting light across the cozy space I had filled with my own things. It was small, but it was mine. It didn't matter that it was modest. What mattered was that it was a reflection of who I was now, a woman who had chosen herself for the first time in years. I began my mornings with a cup of coffee, taking in the quiet of the garden outside. I would sit on my balcony, feeling the gentle breeze on my face, watching the birds fly through the trees. It was peaceful, it was simple, and it was everything I had needed for so long. I spent the mornings doing things I had never had time for before, reading books, tending to my plants, and thinking about what I wanted for my future, for the first time. I wasn't waiting for anyone to give me approval. I wasn't dependent on someone else's validation. I had learned that I didn't need to be anyone's mother, anyone's caregiver, to have worth. I was enough, just as I was. It wasn't about pleasing others anymore. It wasn't about waiting for Hope to see me or acknowledge my sacrifices. It was about me taking care of myself for once, and then, one morning, as I was sipping my coffee and reading through the local newspaper, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized the area code. It was Hope. I didn't answer right away. The old me would have scrambled to pick up the phone, desperate for a chance to speak to her. But the new Clara May wasn't desperate anymore. I had learned to wait. I had learned to sit with my feelings, to let things unfold in their own time. I stared at the phone for a moment, the temptation to pick it up strong. But then I took a deep breath and let it ring. When the voicemail beeped, I listened carefully. "Mama, it's me, Hope." Her voice said softly, "I've been trying to reach you. I just wanted to check on you. I'm sorry for everything. I know I've hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it. Please, can we talk?" I sat there, the words hanging in the air. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, and yes, even a bit of hope. It was the first time in so long that she had reached out to me, truly reached out. But even then, there was something in her voice that struck me. It wasn't just about apologizing. It was about her needing something from me again, but this time, I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms. This time, it was my decision how I wanted to respond. I didn't call her back immediately. Instead, I sat with my feelings. I thought about how far I had come in these last few months. I thought about how much I had changed, how much I had learned to stand up for myself. I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who no longer waited, who no longer allowed anyone to treat her as an afterthought. It was time for me to make a choice. I had to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with Hope, and what kind of woman I was willing to be. I didn't want to return to the old dynamic, the one where I was always waiting for her, always adjusting to her schedule, always sacrificing my own needs for her. I wasn't going to fall into that trap again. That night, after a long day of settling into my new routine, I sat down at my kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. I wrote a letter to Hope. It wasn't a letter of anger or resentment. It wasn't about blaming her for everything that had happened. It was simply about telling her where I stood now, about explaining how I felt, and about setting clear boundaries for the future. I had to make it clear that I wouldn't be the same woman I had been before, the one who always gave, always forgave, always accepted whatever came her way. I poured my heart into that letter. I explained that I loved her deeply, but that love could no longer come at the expense of my own dignity. I told her that I wasn't mad, but I was deeply hurt by the way she had treated me. I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be one of mutual respect, not one where I was expected to always put her needs above my own. After I finished, I read the letter over again. It was honest, but it was also kind. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a statement of where I was in my life now. A woman who had learned to value herself, who had learned that her worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I sent the letter the next morning. A week passed, and I heard nothing from Hope. The silence didn't bother me the way it once had. I had gotten used to the quiet, to the feeling of being alone but not lonely. My days were filled with new experiences, new friends, and a sense of independence I had never known before. I didn't need her validation anymore. I was living my life for myself. But one afternoon, as I was walking back from the garden after watering my plants, I spotted a familiar face in the lobby. It was Hope. She was standing there, looking unsure, almost out of place. Devon was standing beside her, looking equally uncomfortable. They saw me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something different in Hope's eyes. It wasn't just an apology. It was something deeper. It was understanding. "Mama," Hope said, her voice tentative. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, watching her, watching them. Devon didn't say a word. I could tell he was waiting for me to speak first. Finally, I nodded. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside to let them into my apartment. The moment they entered, I could feel the tension between us. The air was thick with unspoken words, with years of hurt that hadn't been addressed. Hope sat down on the couch, and Devon followed her, but neither of them seemed to know where to begin. Hope spoke first. "Mama, I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what I did. About how I treated you. And I realize now that I was wrong. I was so caught up in my own life that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I'm sorry. I really am." I didn't answer right away. I was taking in her words, letting them settle in my heart. Part of me wanted to forgive her right away, to let her back into my life the way things had been before. But the other part of me knew that I couldn't go back to that. Things had changed, and I had changed. "I appreciate your apology," I said slowly. "But it's not enough for things to go back to how they were. I've spent my whole life being the one who gave, who waited, who adjusted to everyone else's needs. But I can't do that anymore. I can't keep waiting for you to come around. I've learned to live for myself now." Hope looked at me with a mixture of surprise and sorrow. "But Mama, I don't want you to feel like this. I want us to be close again. I want to fix this." I took a deep breath. "I want that too, Hope, but it can't be on your terms. It has to be on mine. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for respect. And if you want a relationship with me, that's what it will take." The conversation lasted for hours, and it wasn't easy. There were moments of silence, moments where we both had to take a step back to let the truth sink in. But by the end of the day, something had changed. Hope and I weren't the same people we had been before. Our relationship would never be the same. But I was beginning to see that it didn't have to be. Sometimes the greatest love a mother can give is teaching her children how to respect her, how to see her as a person, not just a caregiver. As the weeks went by, we started to rebuild our relationship piece by piece. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt like Hope saw me, really saw me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just Clara May, Hope's mother. I was Clara May Harrison, a woman who had her own voice, her own needs, her own dreams. It was a new beginning for both of us. As I sat in my new apartment, looking out over the peaceful garden, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The days of sitting by the phone, waiting for Hope to call, were gone. The constant worry about whether she would come to visit or include me in her life had become a distant memory. For the first time in years, I was living on my own terms, creating a life that was completely mine. The phone calls from Hope became less frequent after that conversation. There was no pressure for me to call, no expectations for her to check in or come over. She had her life, and I had mine. I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace in that. I spent my days filling them with things I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I signed up for a pottery class at the local community centre, something I had always been curious about but had never explored. I joined the weekly book club at the Legacy at Peachtree, something I had always enjoyed but had never given myself the time to do. It was liberating, knowing I was doing things for myself, things that made me feel fulfilled. But even as I began to embrace this new life, there were moments where I would catch myself longing for the relationship I once had with Hope. The old wounds would sometimes reopen, and I would feel that ache in my chest. I missed the little girl who used to sit on my lap, the one who promised to always need me. I missed the woman I thought I knew, the daughter who once told me I was the most important person in her life, and then, as if to remind me that nothing in life is ever truly perfect. Hope called again one evening. This time, there was a shift in her voice. It was different, softer, more vulnerable. "Mama," she said, hesitantly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I know I hurt you, and I've been trying to understand why. I've been so caught up in my own world, in my own plans, that I lost sight of you. And I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My initial instinct was to tell her it was okay, to let her off the hook. But I had learned by now that my feelings mattered too. My forgiveness would not come easily, nor should it. I had to teach her that. I appreciate your apology, Hope, I said softly, my voice steady. But it's not just about saying you're sorry. It's about actions. It's about proving to me that you respect me, that you see me as more than just your mother, but as a woman with her own life, her own needs. I can't keep living for you. I can't keep adjusting to your life and putting mine on hold. I need you to understand that. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could tell she was processing what I had said, weighing it against the life she had been living, the expectations she had placed on me. Finally, she spoke, her voice filled with emotion. I understand, Mama, I really do. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry. I want to make things right. I don't want to lose you. I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try. I want us to have a real relationship. Her words were a mixture of relief and uncertainty, but there was also a sincerity in her voice that made me believe she was finally starting to see me. To see me as more than just a mother, more than just a caregiver. She was beginning to understand that I was a person, too. It's going to take time. Hope, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine. I need to see that you're willing to put in the effort, just as much as I have. I can't be the only one trying to make this work. I will, Mama, I promise. I'll show you that I can be the daughter you need me to be. We talked for hours that night, and by the time the conversation ended, I felt a shift. It wasn't a magical fix, and I didn't expect it to be. But it was a start, a real, honest start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place in her life again. Hope's apology, and the realization that she was genuinely trying to understand my feelings, was a turning point. It didn't immediately heal all the wounds, but it did something even more important. It opened a door. The door to a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect and understanding, not obligation. I began to see our interactions in a new light. I no longer felt like I was waiting for her to acknowledge me, to give me validation. I no longer felt like I was chasing after her approval. I was living for myself, and that made all the difference. I could offer her a healthy relationship, but only if I maintained my boundaries. Only if I didn't let her take my peace away again. As the weeks passed, I continued to enjoy my newfound independence. I spent my days doing the things that made me feel alive, things I had neglected for so long. The knitting class, the yoga sessions, the pottery lessons, they all gave me a sense of fulfillment I had never known before. I wasn't just filling my time. I was enriching my life. I had learned that self-care wasn't selfish. It wasn't something to be put off until others were satisfied. It was something I had to prioritize, because only then could I truly give to others. Only then could I be the best version of myself. And, slowly, Hope began to understand that. She started making more of an effort to check in, to call without an agenda. She would ask about my day, about the things I was doing, and listen with genuine interest. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough for me. One day, as I sat with a cup of tea on my balcony, watching the sunset, I thought about how far I had come. The journey hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been quick, but it had been worth it. I had found myself again. I had rediscovered the woman I had almost forgotten, the woman who had dreams, who had a life outside of being a mother. Hope still had a long way to go in terms of understanding the depth of what I had been through, but I knew that we were both learning. We were both growing, and that was all I could ask for. It was during one of our Sunday phone calls that Hope asked me how I was doing. She had been doing this more often lately, checking in on me, truly caring about how I was feeling. "I'm doing well, baby," I said, a smile in my voice. "I'm really happy here. I've made a life for myself, and I'm enjoying it." I've learned a lot about myself these past few months. I'm glad to hear that, Mama, Hope replied, her voice soft with emotion. I know I've let you down, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be the daughter you deserve. I know, Hope, I said. And that means a lot to me. But just remember, this is my time now. I've spent so many years making sure you were okay, making sure you had everything you needed. Now I'm learning to take care of myself. And that's okay. She was quiet for a moment, and I could tell she was thinking about what I had said. I understand, Mama, she finally said. And I'm proud of you. I want to keep working on our relationship, but I'm also proud of you for finding your own path. Her words made my heart swell with pride. Not because she had said the right thing, but because I knew, deep down, she was starting to see me. Not just as her mother, but as a woman. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. True peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've made the right decision. The kind that comes from choosing yourself, from setting boundaries and standing firm in them. I wasn't waiting for hope anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I had finally learned that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval. It depended on me. And that realization, that sense of freedom, was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. The days turned into weeks. And my life at the Legacy at Peachtree began to settle into a comfortable rhythm. I was no longer living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. My mornings began with quiet moments on the balcony, sipping my coffee while watching the sunrise. The gardens became a sanctuary, a place where I could clear my mind and reflect on the changes in my life, as much as I embraced this new chapter. There were times when the struggle of letting go still lingered. The bond between a mother and her child is unlike any other, and it was hard to shake the instinct to protect Hope, to keep her close. Even as I moved forward, a part of me couldn't help but look back, wondering if I had done enough for her, if I could have been a better mother, if I had failed her somehow. There were nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments when I had been there for her. The sacrifices, the late nights, the years I spent working 2 jobs to give her the life I thought she deserved. And now, after all of that, I was no longer part of her life in the way I had imagined. I tried not to dwell on those thoughts. But they crept in when I was alone, when the world was quiet, and all I had was my own mind to wrestle with. I had made peace with my choices, but the echoes of those years of sacrifice still haunted me, like ghosts that refused to fade. Hope's visits to the Legacy were sporadic, but they were genuine. Each time we spent time together, talking about her life, her career, and the changes she was going through. I could see the growth in her. She was starting to understand what I had been through, the challenges I had faced. She was beginning to see me not just as her mother, but as a woman who had lived a full, complicated life. Our conversations were no longer just about her. We began to talk about the things I had done for myself, the goals I was pursuing, the dreams I had put on hold for so long. I could see her listening, really listening, in a way she hadn't before. And in those moments, I realized something important. Healing was a two-way street. It wasn't just about me learning to stand up for myself. It was also about Hope learning to see me for who I was, and not just as someone who existed to serve her, but rebuilding trust wasn't easy. There were still moments when I questioned whether things would ever be the same, when I wondered if she truly understood the depth of my hurt. Sometimes I still felt like the other woman in her life, the one who didn't quite fit in. The one who had to make way for her new life with Devon and his family. Despite these moments of doubt, I knew that we were taking small steps in the right direction. There was no quick fix to the years of emotional distance, but there was hope, real hope. Hope that we could build a relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, even if it took time. I had learned the importance of patience with Hope, with myself, and with the process of healing. One afternoon, as Hope and I sat in the common area at the Legacy, sipping iced tea and talking about the latest book I had been reading. She said something that made my heart swell. "You know, Mama, I've been thinking about how you raised me. I don't know how you did it, how you managed to work so hard, take care of me, and still give me everything I needed. You've always been my rock, even if I didn't see it before. I'm sorry for taking you for granted." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that I hadn't realized I needed to hear. It was the kind of apology that came from a place of true understanding, not just regret. And in that moment, I felt something shift between us. There was an understanding that hadn't been there before, a recognition of all the years I had spent loving her, all the sacrifices I had made. I did what I had to do. "Hope," I said, my voice soft. But it wasn't always easy. I didn't always know if I was doing the right thing. I just knew I had to keep going, for you. And that's what I did. "I know," she said quietly. "And I didn't always appreciate it. But I do now. I really do." It was a small moment, but it was monumental. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt acknowledged in a way that had eluded me for years. It wasn't just about her saying the right words. It was about her understanding, about her taking responsibility for the distance that had grown between us. In that moment, I realized that my role as a mother had changed. I was no longer the person who was there to fix everything, to make things better, to keep giving and sacrificing. Now, I was a woman who had learned to prioritize herself. I was still Hope's mother, but I was also Clara May Harrison, a woman who had her own life, her own dreams. And that was okay. As the months passed, our relationship began to change in ways I hadn't expected. Hope began to reach out more, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely wanted to. We talked more often, and each conversation felt more authentic than the last. I could see that she was putting in the effort, trying to understand me, trying to make amends for the years of distance, but it wasn't just about talking. It was about action. Hope began to invite me to more things, dinners with her and Devon, weekend outings, even small gatherings with her friends. I could see that she was trying to include me in her life, but not in a way that felt forced. It was as if she was finally understanding what it meant to be a family, to be there for each other, not just out of duty, but because we genuinely wanted to. I also started to let go of the resentment I had carried for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had to forgive, not just for Hope's sake, but for my own. Holding on to that pain, that anger, had only kept me tied to a past that no longer served me. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the hurt. It was about freeing myself from the weight of it. It was a rainy afternoon when Hope called me again. This time, there was excitement in her voice. "Mama, I've been thinking," she said. "Devon and I are planning to visit you next weekend. We'd love to spend some time with you, just the three of us." It's been too long. I could feel the warmth in her words. It wasn't just about the visit. It was about the intention behind it. She wasn't trying to fix things or make up for anything. She was just trying to reconnect, to build something real. "I'd love that," I said, smiling as I spoke. "I'll make sure we have plenty of sweet tea and your favorite peach cobbler." We hung up, and I sat back in my chair, feeling a sense of contentment that had eluded me for so long. Hope had come a long way. And so had I. The years of waiting, of hoping for a different kind of relationship, were behind me. The future wasn't about the past anymore. It was about embracing the present, a present where I was seen, where I was valued, and where I was loved. And that was enough. It was a rainy afternoon when Hope called me again. This time, there was excitement in her voice. "Mama, I've been thinking," she said. "Devon and I are planning to visit you next weekend. We'd love to spend some time with you, just the three of us." It's been too long. I could feel the warmth in her words. It wasn't just about the visit. It was about the intention behind it. She wasn't trying to fix things or make up for anything. She was just trying to reconnect, to build something real. I'd love that, I said, smiling as I spoke. I'll make sure we have plenty of sweet tea and your favorite peach cobbler. We hung up, and I sat back in my chair, feeling a sense of contentment that had eluded me for so long. Hope had come a long way, and so had I. The years of waiting, of hoping for a different kind of relationship, were behind me. The future wasn't about the past anymore. It was about embracing the present, a present where I was seen, where I was valued, and where I was loved. And that was enough. The weekend Hope and Devon visited was nothing short of beautiful. When they arrived, I noticed a change in both of them, not just in Hope, but in Devon too. There was a warmth between us now, a sense of openness that hadn't been there before. Hope had always been the bridge between us, but this time, Devon seemed genuinely eager to connect, to become part of the new dynamic we were slowly building. When they walked in, I could tell that Hope had chosen this moment carefully. She had arranged everything, a quiet afternoon together, no distractions, no expectations. I had prepared one of our family's favorite meals, fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, and of course peach cobbler for dessert. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the meal in front of us, for the company, and for the growth we had all gone through. This is amazing. Mama, Hope said, her voice soft with appreciation as she took a bite of the cornbread. I smiled. It's nothing fancy, but it's made with love, just like I've always made it. We talked, not about the past, but about the future. We discussed everything from Hope's work to the plans she and Devon were making for their future together. It was the first time in a long time that the conversation felt natural, unburdened by the weight of old wounds. There was no pretense, no feeling like we had to tiptoe around sensitive topics. We were simply enjoying each other's company, and for me, that was everything. As we finished dinner, Devon turned to me with a smile. You know, Clara May, he said, using my full name as if to signify that this wasn't just a casual conversation. I've been thinking. You've made a real impact on Hope. I've seen the way she looks at you, and I can see how much you mean to her. I think we've both learned a lot from this past year about family, about what really matters. His words took me by surprise, but in the best way possible. Devon had always seemed like a quiet, reserved man, and while he had always been polite, I had never felt like he truly saw me until now. His acknowledgement felt like a small, but meaningful bridge being built between us. It wasn't just an apology or an acknowledgement of the past. It was a real gesture of respect for who I was and the role I had played in shaping Hope's life. Thank you, Devon, I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. It means a lot to me that you see that. I've always wanted what was best for Hope, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm seeing the best version of her, and of you too. The rest of the evening passed in easy conversation. The distance between us, which had once felt like an insurmountable gulf, was slowly closing. We shared stories, laughed at old memories, and even talked about things that were difficult, but necessary. I wasn't sure where this would all lead, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. As the days passed after Hope and Devon's visit, I found myself reflecting on the changes in both my life and my relationship with Hope. There had been so many years of struggle, so many moments where I wondered if things would ever get better. But now I saw a different future, one where we could be there for each other without any expectations, without any pain from the past. One evening, as I sat by the window looking out at the garden, I thought about the years I had spent living in the shadows of my own life. I had always been the one to give, to sacrifice, to put my needs last. But that Clara May was gone. The woman who had lived for everyone else was no more. I had rediscovered myself, found my voice, and learned that my worth was not defined by my relationship to others. It had taken years of pain, heartbreak, and self-reflection, but I had come to understand something profound. I was enough, just as I was. I didn't need anyone else to validate my existence, and I didn't need to keep waiting for things to change. I had taken control of my own life, and that had made all the difference, but healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I still felt the old scars, the old wounds that had never fully healed. There were moments when I missed the woman I had been before, the mother who had been everything to Hope. There were moments when I wished things had been different, when I wished I could have been the mother she had always needed. But those thoughts didn't consume me anymore. I had made peace with the past, and now I was focused on the future. My future. It was in the quiet moments of reflection that I came to understand something even deeper. Forgiveness was not just about others, it was also about myself. I had spent so many years holding onto grudges, to feelings of abandonment and hurt. I had let those emotions fester, letting them dictate how I saw Hope, how I saw myself. But forgiveness was the key to moving forward. For years, I had been the one to give and give, without ever asking for anything in return. But now I was learning to set boundaries. I had spent so much time giving everything to Hope that I had lost sight of myself. I had forgotten what it meant to stand up for my own needs, to assert myself in relationships. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing the things that had hurt me. It was about understanding that holding onto that pain wasn't serving me. It was about freeing myself from the chains of resentment and disappointment. I didn't need to forget what had happened, but I did need to let go of the grip that those memories had on me. And so I began to set boundaries. I began to express my needs clearly, without fear of rejection or judgment. I told Hope that while I loved her, I could no longer allow her to be the only one to decide how much space I occupied in her life. It wasn't about cutting her off. It was about making sure I was respected, that my needs were seen, and that my voice mattered just as much as hers. It was a delicate dance. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always perfect. There were still moments of tension, moments when old patterns resurfaced. But I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't about being cold or harsh. It was about protecting myself, about creating the space I needed to thrive, and ensuring that the love between us wasn't suffocated by expectations. The more I reflected on my journey, the more I realized how far I had come. The woman I had once been, the one who waited for others to choose her, to validate her, to decide her worth, no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had learned to live for herself, to embrace the fullness of her life, and to find joy in her own company. I no longer waited for Hope to invite me to things. I didn't wait for her to tell me I was important. I had become my own source of validation. I had built a life that was rich and fulfilling, one that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. Hope and I were still finding our way. We were still navigating the changes in our relationship, still learning how to coexist as two independent individuals who shared a bond that would never break. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of losing her because I had learned to find peace within myself. I was no longer defined by my role as her mother. I was defined by who I was, Clara May Harrison, a woman who had lived, loved, and found the strength to choose her own path. As I sit here now, in the quiet of my apartment at the Legacy at Peachtree, I realize how much I've gained over the past few months. I've gained a sense of peace I never thought I would find again. I've gained the knowledge that I am enough, just as I am. And I've gained the ability to live without regret. Hope still calls. We still talk, still share the little moments of life. And while we may never return to the way things were before, I have come to accept that we don't need to. The relationship we have now is real. It's honest. And for the first time in a long time, I can look at her and know that even if things are different, they are better. The best part is, I know that no matter what happens, I am enough. And that's a gift I've given myself, the gift of self-love, of forgiveness, and of finally living for me. As the seasons continued to change, so did I. The warmth of summer had faded into the cool embrace of fall, and the leaves in the garden outside my window had begun to turn shades of gold and amber. But it was not just the seasons that were changing, it was me. Every day, I woke up to a new version of myself, a version that didn't just survive but thrived. I no longer waited for phone calls, for apologies, or for recognition. My mornings were filled with simple pleasures: the smell of fresh coffee brewing, the rustle of the leaves outside, the quiet hum of life unfolding. The legacy at Peachtree had become more than just a place to live. It had become my home, a sanctuary where I had found the space to heal and grow. It was a place where I was free to be who I was. Without the expectations or limitations of my past, I spent my days doing things that nourished my soul, from morning walks in the garden to writing in my journal. From attending the weekly yoga class to spending time with new friends I had made along the way. The people around me no longer saw me as just Hope's mother. They saw me as Clara May Harrison, a woman with a past. Yes, but also a woman with a future, a woman with dreams, a woman with a voice. One Sunday afternoon, as I sat in the common room, chatting with Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Davis, I received a call from Hope. I had started to recognize the pattern in our conversations. She called more often now, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to. The sound of her voice no longer filled me with anxiety. I no longer wondered if this would be the moment she would disappoint me again. I no longer feared what she might say. I simply enjoyed hearing her voice. "Mama, I've been thinking," she began. "Devon and I are planning to come visit next month. We want to spend some time with you, just the three of us. I was hoping we could take you out to lunch and show you a new place we found." I smiled at the thought. This wasn't a desperate attempt to make things right. It wasn't a grand gesture of guilt. It was just a daughter wanting to spend time with her mother. A mother who had learned to stand on her own, who had built a life for herself, who had learned the importance of self-respect. That sounds lovely. "Hope," I replied, my voice warm but steady. "I'd love that." As I hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't the phone call I had once imagined, a dramatic reconciliation, a flood of emotions. Instead, it was the beginning of something even better, a relationship built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. I wasn't waiting for Hope to make up for the past anymore. I was living in the present, and in that present, we were building a future together, not as mother and daughter who were defined by the past, but as two individuals who had both grown, both changed, and both learned how to love without expectations. As I sat in my favorite chair, looking out at the sunset over Decatur, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The woman I had been, the one who sacrificed everything for her family, the one who gave so much of herself that she lost sight of who she was gone. And in her place was a woman who had learned to find her own voice, to set her own boundaries, and to love herself. I had spent so many years giving, so many years waiting for others to decide my worth. But now I knew that my worth was not defined by anyone else. It was defined by me, by the choices I made, by the life I had created, and by the peace I had found within myself. I had no regrets, none, not anymore. Every step of my journey, from the pain of being excluded from Hope's wedding to the quiet moments of healing, from the struggles of setting boundaries to the joy of finding my own happiness, had led me to this point. A point where I could say with confidence that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. A point where I knew that the future was mine to create, a future filled with the possibilities that came from choosing myself. And as I thought about the years ahead, I smiled. There were no more questions about what I would do or who I would become. I had already become her. I had become the woman who no longer waited to be included in someone else's story. I had become the woman who wrote her own dot as the light from the setting sun bathed the room in warmth. I whispered to myself, "Thank you, Clara May, thank you for everything." And in that moment, I knew that I had built a legacy not just for Hope, but for myself, a legacy of self-respect, independence, and the power of reclaiming one's own life.